Time to consider one of the great battles of the second half of the 20th century, the battle between the image and the printed word. You know, to work in television is to be relentlessly besieged by criticisms of its banality, distortion, and violence. But most of what you've read about the dangers of television has been self-interested opinion, mostly from people who've earned their living with the competition, print. But TV does not eliminate text, nor does it lessen the value placed on the spoken word. What TV replaces is the very world print created over the last 500 years, and which we've come to identify with civilization itself. Now, image has become all-powerful with an impact that is instantaneous and international. In its totality, it is uncensorable, and in its effect, unpredictable, and day in, day out, it continues to grow. Hundreds of channels, thousands of programs, a television revolution beyond even the fondest dreams of those who, like me, love and approve of television, and certainly beyond its critics' worst nightmare.
I'm on television, and you're not. I'm in the land that time forgot. I'm lost in space. I'm the next generation, just a digitized blip in a televised nation. And I spy with my one big eye, all of my kingdom, all of your minds. While above me, beside me, below and behind me, the video universe babbles divinely. But this is a fantasy, don't ever forget. The tube that feels ain't been invented yet. Get cut and you'll bleed. You can't change a channel, and you'll never be healed by an expert panel.
What has fueled the television revolution, the secret of its irresistible force, can be explained in one word: entertainment. And entertainment through history can be reduced also to one essential element, and that is story. For example, would anyone watch a juggler if there were no possibility that they might drop whatever it is they're juggling? Jugglers are a story waiting to happen, and what do we want for them? Is it success or failure? What is the best story? Isn't that what makes politics so entertaining? Its flirtation with triumph and disaster. We are drawn to stories because in deciding whether we want success or failure for the juggler, and triumph or disaster for the politician, we come closer to the truth about ourselves. That is the irresistible appeal of entertainment. Entertainment, to paraphrase Marshall McLuhan and Northrop Frye, does not take us out of ourselves, but into ourselves. At the heart of all entertainment is story, and the story is always us.
Dad! Dad, the truck is here! Hello, sir.
How you doing, son? Hi.
Now you can say that I've grown bitter, but of this you may be sure. The rich have got their channels in the bedrooms of the poor, and there's a mighty judgment coming. But I may be wrong. You see, you hear these funny voices in the Tower of Song.
Oh, good evening. Tonight's play begins in a museum, and the title is The Cheney Vase. That's all I intend to tell you. You'll have to figure the rest out for yourselves. And now our sponsor wishes to say a few words designed to send you rushing out immediately to buy his products. But please endeavor to restrain yourselves. I don't want you to miss our story.
I, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, do solemnly swear.
Bleeding hearts around.
That kid, of course, was me. I had bought my family's first set with my bar mitzvah money, and while I didn't then realize that I was of the very first all-television generation, I sensed somehow that having visual entertainment perpetually on tap and conveniently delivered to my house, to my bedroom, was a revolution. What a generation later social historian Camille Paglia then identified as a sensual pagan torrent had flooded into my life, into all our lives, and nothing ever was going to be the same. So I'd like to begin with an abject apology. When we were first planning this wig bubble, it was an inspiration of the last moment. You can see, maybe feel that it's a bit of an improvisation right now. But I said to the little group that were trying to pull it together, are we sure we want to make this presentation in a kind of theater-like setting with over 100 seats? It's pretty esoteric stuff. It's probably of interest to academics and people in the specialized professions having to do with archives and libraries and so on. Maybe we should reconsider. Maybe we should put this on in a boardroom and kind of have a little graduate symposium. And instead, full house. I'm shocked. I'm chuffed. I'm really pleased that you're here, and surprised in a delighted way. So that opening, that cold opening, is from well, it was a visual essay of my theories of television that Ed Conroy, who you'll meet on the panel a little later on, reminded me I did 30 years ago. 30 years ago. And what I hope it demonstrates in the context of today's session is that even then I was interested and had been staring into the eye of television, not just as someone who watched it and made it, but as someone who was intrigued to figure out what it really was. What was it? Was it a box? Was it a screen? Was it, once upon a time, a beautiful piece of furniture? Today, reduced to a window, a mirror, a megaphone. And of course, its enduring appeal and its growing power, which was visible even then, 30 years ago, 1995, was that television encompassed all of those things. and so has been acknowledged as the dominant medium of the 20th century, but here we are in the 21st, and TV is shedding its skin and becoming something else, even more pervasive and perhaps dangerous in the 21st century. So why have I invited Peter Kaufman here? And it's because he's pursuing pretty much the same work. But the thing about Peter is, unlike the rest of us who go about our lives and our professions and maybe think for a minute about the power of media, he puts in the time. He investigates and finds the evidence and marshals it into some kind of logical and understandable form. And of course, we're all in it now, I feel, sometimes in the sense of having just been hit by a wallop, wondering what's become of us with the advent of digital, and where will it all lead? I don't think it takes a genius or a major scholar to see common sense that image has completely dominated the world in its various forms: film, television, and now digital. But Peter is the kind of guy who has dug in it deeply enough to help us chart the journey from where we've been, the majesty of television that I recorded and flew the flag of 30 years ago, to where it's going, which is in our pocket, somewhere in our pocket. And what used to be a professional pursuit was harder to make images. Used to take massive investments, large crews. Now everybody makes images, and most of it is awful, and a lot of it is worse than that. So the question on all our minds is, what is the meaning of this new form? I've always been interested in the future, and I had hoped to bind with the digital reality of now, but I must admit, I'm finding it harder and harder. The internet, for me, it's kind of a garbage can, and what social has done to the world, I think, is awful, maybe irreparable, and may not be forgivable. So I turned to Peter because he had just published this book, and he tried to summarize all of these factums and problems and challenges, and even offer some advice to people who still want to get into the game. And I'll say a last word, which is he comes at it at the MIT School of Open Learning, not only with a view to figuring out what lies ahead, but to preserve what lies behind. People sometimes think that archives are cemeteries where you put boxes that no one will ever look again, but in fact they're collections of enormous potential. That's the basis of the future. And without decent archives to look at and to study and to use as the basis of speculations and so on, we'd be infinitely poorer. So I'm going to resist the temptation of kind of telling you in advance what Peter's going to say by actually inviting Peter Kaufman up here from, you live in New York? In Cambridge, Mass. I went to school there for a while. Fascinating, rich place. Yeah, lots of drama, especially these days with Harvard and so on. Yeah, so please meet Peter B. Kaufman.
Guys, I can retire after an introduction like that. I should quit now while I'm ahead. Thank you very much, Moses, for this, for your hospitality, and for everything. I'd like to talk about the book that brought some of us here, out now from the MIT Press, about what I discovered during the process of writing it, drill into some of its key findings, and then propose a couple remedies for the giant media, the giant epistemic chaos that we live in today. And if time allows, I'd like to say a further word, maybe in our group discussion, about the new book I'm writing, which will come out in 50 years. On Thursday, the Trump administration launched an all-out attack on Harvard University, putatively yanking the rights of international students, including Canadians, to visit and study there. Now at MIT, where I work, we don't much like Harvard anyway. That's a joke, delete. But how on earth did we get here? To a full-out assault on knowledge, education, science, medicine even, truth. The woman who ran the World Wrestling Entertainment channels and the media franchise associated with it all is our Secretary of Education. The Fox News TV personality, and a weekend personality no less, has been appointed to be our demented Secretary of Defense. The TV personality Dr. Oz is now running the systems of Medicare and Medicaid. How did we get here? Where the cabinet is like a green room and the Oval Office is now a studio. This is Trump dressing down Zelensky, and at the end of it, as you can see on some of the monitors, maybe better, Trump turns to the cameras and says, well, if nothing else, this is going to be great television. The moving image had something to do with it. In fact, and this is what's so extraordinary for me to be speaking in the greatest physical archive of the medium in the world and standing, beside the visionary who, in assembling all of it, predicted this stuff. The moving image and television has had everything to do with this mess. Trump rose through and with this medium. The Apprentice ran on network television for 13 years. And as he began contemplating a career in politics, he was elevated and sustained by Fox. The slide says, no two media companies have done more to reshape the modern geopolitical order than Fox Corp and News Corp. It's true. Now, I come from a long and distinguished line of pathological narcissists. I know one when I see one. They know what to do to sustain themselves. And the man who I'm talking about is now incredibly wisely bolstered by a particular oligarchy, not of tech bros, as people say, but they're screen and speaker bros, the heads of Apple, Amazon, ByteDance, Meta, News Corp, the nutjob video podcasters. They were not only invited to the presidential inauguration, here's a photo of them, some of them there, but they accepted the damn invitation. Television is absolutely the most consequential medium of our time, and he knows it. The transcripts are gone from the White House now. It's only video. Trump has decided to post only videos now. Who controls this medium? Who controls the moving image and the screens that it appears on controls almost everything. And, you know, if the connection, note the camera at the back of the room, if the connection between trying to shut down Harvard and what we're talking about here today sounds crazy, it's not. This is the State House in Lansing, Michigan, a couple years ago. This is the Capitol building in Washington when Biden defeated Trump. And this is the University of Vienna in the 1930s. Today, it all has everything to do with Fox and NBC and television, in the same way that in the 1920s and 1930s, in Germany and Austria, it had to do with radio and the newspapers and the emerging dynamic power of cinema. Now, I started writing the moving image 15 years ago, simply because I thought it would be good to be able to cite film and sound with the same facility that we can cite text in today. In footnotes, with endnotes, bibliographies, the critical apparatus that has accreted around 6 centuries of our work now with the printed word. There has been up to now, you know, no Chicago Manual of Style or AP Manual or Elements of Style for the moving image. And these guidebooks and others like them, the professional trades of journalism and law, each have their own, give scant, if any, attention to the moving image, even though, as my book goes on and on and on and on about, the moving image is the most important, the most consequential medium of our time. For a kind of anodyne example, we know more or less how to cite a passage in, say, John Steinbeck's book, The Grapes of Wrath, speaking of the 1930s, as Mark was encouraging me to do. We all know how to approach the structure of writing and sentence structure and syntax and grammar, because we've had 6,000 years of writing and, again, some 600 years of print. So here's a passage from the book. This is the first sentence. Here's a passage from the book that I'll read. It's excerpted in my book, The Moving Image. Jode looked into the bedroom. This is from Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath. No bed, no chairs, nothing. On the wall, a picture of an Indian girl in color, labeled Red Wing. A bed slat leaning against the wall, and in one corner, a woman's high-button shoe, curled up at the toe and broken over the instep. Jode picked it up and looked at it. I remember this, he said. This was Ma's. It's all wore out now. Ma liked them shoes, had them for years. No, they've went. Took everything. The sun had lowered until it came through the angled end windows now, and it flashed on the edges of the broken glass. Jode turned at last and went out and crossed the porch. He sat down on the edge of it and rested his bare feet on the 12-by-12 step. The evening light was on the fields, and the cotton plants threw long shadows on the ground, and the molting willow tree threw a long shadow too. Casey sat down beside Jode. They never wrote you nothing, he asked. No, like I said, they wasn't people to write. Pa could write, but he wouldn't, didn't like to. It'd give him the shivers to write. He could work out a catalog order as good as the next fella, but he wouldn't write no letters just for ducks. They sat side by side, staring off into the distance. Jode laid his rolled coat on the porch beside him. His independent hands rolled a cigarette, smoothed it and lighted it, and he inhaled deeply and blew the smoke out through his nose. Something's wrong, he said. I can't put my finger on her. I got an itch that something's wronger than hell. How do you cite that? It's easy in text. In the film, these 283 words, the film, John Ford's film, these 283 words are condensed into 7 camera shots, edited across 14 seconds with sound. And we should roll that clip if we can.
nobody here. Something's happened. You got a match? They're all gone or dead. They never wrote you nothing? No, they wasn't people to write. It's Ma. She had them for years.
Thanks. The script reads this way. They're all gone or dead. They never wrote you nothing? Nah, there wasn't people to write. This Maz, she had them for years. It's easy to cite the script, but how do you quote it? Not by reading the script, but with an actual clip, like something like this, in things that we are now producing across media. Some instructions from the book are here. It's the movie poster. There's a table of moving image citation models that we worked on with the MIT Press for a long time. But how do you gain not only the comfort level and the technical facility to be able to cite moving image material with moving image material, but the affirmation from society and copyright law that it's okay to throw a chunk of video on a screen like a chunk of babble and the lies coming out of the White House and analyze and dissect it. Why is this important? Again, it's important because this is the most consequential medium of our time. When the Washington Post creates a database of Trump lies from the first term, it's all text. The analysis is all text. You can even search them, these lies, by topic. Lies about taxes, lies about healthcare, lies about Russia. But, you know, the lies were told over video. And if we can't quote the video and punch back as a society with a video database like this text database, we're stuck once again bringing a butter knife to a gunfight. Here's an image from last week of Trump actually doing what I'm talking about, showing clips about South Africa to the leader of South Africa, Ramaphosa, in the Oval Office. The Oval Office now as a theater. So the moving image is the key way people receive information and develop their understanding of facts and reality today. The moving image is the emerging medium of record. The moving image is becoming a key and even the key source of evidence of crimes like the murder of George Floyd, or war crimes like the ones being committed with our weapons and tax dollars around the world. How do you bring it under control? I hope we can talk about that in our discussion today, and I hope it's a group discussion that includes this full house, even those who are eating ice cream down at the end. Meanwhile, here are some ideas that we're trying to develop for that second edition at the MIT Press. The Chicago Manual is in its 18th edition, by the way. New ideas include an automated citation generator for every responsible video platform. Boom. Would produce citation format for you to use. A disinformation aggregator like the Washington Post has built. An alchemistry motor dynamo that can tell you the truths about stuff and not just the lies. The video equivalent of Wikipedia. And systems of clicking through web-based programming to find source materials and references and verifications, like you can with text online in journals and newspapers and in online encyclopedias. The challenges we face, of course, are huge. Television was not designed as a truth-telling medium. But you know what? Neither was print. And we can go into that. And we have a whole other ecosystem to bother with, too. That keeps us from revealing facts as fast as we spew the opposite out into the world. The best formulation I know in closing these opening remarks anyway, is right here. The truth is paywalled, but the lies are free. And the subtitle that Nathan gave to this article is The Political Economy of Bullshit. But all right, it's time to slide into a discussion. Thank you very much, and Mark Glassman will take the...
So thanks a lot, Peter. I'm Mark Glassman, and I'm going to operate as the kind of, let's hope, immoderate moderator for this. I'm the film critic for Classical 96, editor of POV magazine, the communications manager for CARP. So a few things. And I thought of course, Moses did a wonderful job of giving you a sense of Peter, and now you've got even more. But I'll give you a bit of a bio. Peter B. Kaufman is Senior Development Officer at MIT Open Learning. He's educated at Cornell and Columbia. He's the author of another book, The New Enlightenment and the Fight to Free Knowledge, which was from Seven Stories Press. He's an educator, publisher, and documentary producer. He served as Associate Director of Columbia University's Center for Teaching and Learning, co-chair of JISC's Film and Sound think tank, co-chair of the Copyright Committee of the Association of Moving Image Archivists. I'm going to skip a few and go straight to longtime consultant to the Library of Congress's Packard Campus for Audiovisual Conservation. As I once saw Margaret Atwood being asked to admit her bona fides, she told the lawyer at the time, Clayton Ruby, in other words, I'm distinguished. And I think that would be true for Peter B. Kaufman as well. We have a great panel, and I'm going to introduce them one at a time. And the first person I'm going to introduce is the tallest member of ours and probably the most distinguished in his own way. Anthony Wilson Smith has been CEO since 2012 of Historica Canada, the charitable organization that produces the Heritage Minutes and the Canadian Encyclopedia. Previous to that, he spent most of his career as a journalist, working on assignment in more than 35 countries, and he was an editor-in-chief of Maclean's magazine. Please welcome Anthony Wilson Smith. And please take Anthony, please take a chair. And I've designated that you should have, he was the only one I actually wanted to give a chair to the right because I thought, you know, he's too tall. He needs some space. Ed Conroy is a Toronto-based cultural historian, archivist, and online video producer. He's the founder of RetroOntario.com, and his pieces on Canadian pop culture have appeared in the Toronto Star, Toronto Life, Blog.to, the Canadian Encyclopedia, and YTV.com. Please welcome Ed. And Brian D. Johnson is an old friend, Canadian journalist and filmmaker, best known as entertainment reporter and film critic for Maclean's. He has developed a true career as a filmmaker, and his most recent feature documentary, The Color of Ink, premiered at TIFF in 2022, and if you haven't seen it, I recommend it highly. It's available through the National Film Board. Please welcome Brian. And I wanted to acknowledge Moses' wonderful introduction. Thank you very much, Moses. And I thought before we actually started the discussion, we would show you one more clip from TV, one that is somewhat historical, but I think it also refers in its own way to politics and the politics that will kind of get us going in the discussion. So if we can, please look at that clip. Thank you.
Joseph Stalin once said that if he could control the American film industry, he could control the world. And of course, it was radio in the hands of Goebbels that helped to elect Hitler. Closer to home, André Malraux, the French novelist and resistance fighter turned state bureaucrat, once asked John F. Kennedy, "How on earth do you manage to govern without controlling television?" Well, Malraux's party, the Gaullists, did control television, and still they lost, perhaps because they didn't know television. What politicians fear, of course, is that Another politician might combine access to television with knowledge of television and turn both into political power. After all, for thousands of years, we were ruled by soldiers and priests. With democracy came the lawyers. Why be surprised, then, if the next man on horseback rides television waves?
Italy's most important election campaign in 4 decades has been dominated by a man who's been in politics for less than 100 days, but has more bodyguards than the country's president. A former nightclub crooner who controls Europe's second-largest media empire, Silvio Berlusconi has invented a new brand of politics created for and by television. The video wall is to Mr. Berlusconi what the soapbox was to John Major. The tycoon is a master in the art of seduction by television. Half the country's viewers are regularly glued to one of his 3 channels and their low-fiber diet. From soft porn to soft politics. Berlusconi has used the skills of advertising to inject a sense of national pride at a time of low Italian self-esteem and to promise a new economic miracle produced by low taxes. It was an historic achievement. Only 3 months after it was founded, Forza Italia, Italy's youngest party, has also become its most powerful one.
What we saw, I think, in the electoral campaign was a man who packaged himself well. And we don't know what kind of biscuits we bought. We know what kind of package we bought.
He entered politics less than 100 days ago and hijacked everyone else's revolution. The media tycoon has shown that anything is possible in Italy these days, especially if you have money and television.
We are moving into a new world. What we need above all are concepts to deal with that new world.
And that, of course, the last words were almost a voice of doom from Henry Kissinger, former U.S. Secretary of State, and someone who lived to the age of 100 and continued to write books about what was going on in the world. And Berlusconi, I think, maybe Peter will agree or disagree, is in a way a precursor to Trump. So we will talk about archives and we will talk about aesthetics, but I think first off we want to talk a bit about politics. I have a kind of first question for the audience and for the group here to respond to. The effect of moving images on the current political situation globally is so impactful. From TikTok to TV, from streamers to art films to Hollywood, we're overwhelmed with images. What do they mean to us, not just aesthetically, but socially and politically? And I thought I'd ask Anthony to respond to that first.
I guess I know something about image in the sense, particularly of the Heritage Minutes that have been around for about 35 years now. I've been overseeing them for about 10 or 15, well, for 12, and we've made about 25 or 30. And I'm going to presume a lot of you know what they are. You know, I smell burnt toast, you've got to stop the train, you know those stories, 60-second vignettes of Canadian history. And they're a great privilege to make, and we take about 9 months to make them, about 3 months just to factually verify them. But the thing I always say is very, very often, I'm very popular at cocktail parties until you talk to me longer and decide I'm pretty boring. But for the first part coming in, as soon as people hear about Heritage Minutes, they have an idea for me, there's something, and very often people will say, you know, everything I know about Canadian history, I learned on Heritage Minutes. And what I always want to say, but try to be polite and not say because it's so well intended, is if that's all you know, you don't know enough. You don't know nearly enough. We understand that the minutes are about a doorway into history. It's about looking at something and saying, that's so cool, I never knew that before, I want to find out more, and now I'm going to go to our Canadian Encyclopedia, to books, to something else. But, you know, historical events only happen once, but they can be interpreted countless different ways, pretty much any way you want, depending who you were in that particular moment, what lesson you want to take out of it. And I think the most striking thing that you know, of many things that Peter just said is that elimination of transcript that lets you go over, so you linger instead on the image and give the US president this, you know, they understand a good image when they see one, and particularly the people around them. So you're left with that dominant thing in your head, that's what it is. And one other thing, because everybody here should speak more, is years ago we did a psychographic survey when I was an editor, interviewing people at length, and what we found, the findings were that people don't generally want to know new things about new things. People want to know new things about things with which they're already familiar. Think about where that takes you. And what I would add that has happened over the last 20 years or so is that it's not only people only want to know about things of which they already know, they only want to know things that they like, that fit into their thesis of it. They don't want to be challenged in what their views are, and that's been the big change. And the final part of that is, you know, we're all in the room here with the person who's done more than anybody else probably in the world to democratize the viewing process, the television process, which of course is Moses in the corner. It was all about breaking down walls so we have conversations like this. We're not just up here, you're not just at a distance. It's about all of us are in a dialogue together. What's happened now, though, is that, you know, the few influence makers own the stage, they own the platform, they do everything when they rise above, and it's about saying, here's what I think, and that's all that matters. Never mind if it's true or not, that's what matters, and there's no real exchange back and forth. So what Moses began with so many good things continues in good ways, but it's the reverse that's happening at the higher level.
Ed Conroy, your thoughts on this?
Certainly, I sense we're going into dark places with some of this material.
So I'll start.
I'll start on the light. I believe we are actually living right now in a golden age of access to the past, of access to whether it's films, whether it's music, whether it's vintage television series. We've never had so much information at our fingertips. And I think what constantly surprises me is the apathy with which that's greeted. You know, you can go home tonight and you can pull up anything on your phone and watch that. And I know as a child, growing up in the 1980s, first of all, thank you, Moses, for programming City TV, because that gave me something to watch. But I certainly lamented that I read about old films or heard about old books or old material that I couldn't access. And now we can. And I think it's remarkable that more isn't done, more interest isn't shown in that. We sort of take it for granted now. It's like turning on a tap and getting a glass of water. What keeps me up at night, though, on the darkness front is the advent of AI. And, you know, seeing some of these clips, we know that they're real, but, you know, that line is getting very blurry. I don't know if you're familiar with the works of the Door brothers on TikTok.
Yep.
They now make music videos that feature Trump and Zelensky and Putin smoking blunts and shooting AK-47s at each other. And it looks pretty real. You know, it's not quite there, but it's going to be there probably by next month. I mean, this is no longer a long game that we're saying, oh, one day we'll be there. Like, we're there. We're there now. So I would say, or I guess maybe one of my questions I hope Peter will address is, what's the toolkit to deal with that? I mean, never mind the real footage we're getting on CNN. What are we going to do when we get to the midterms, when we get to the next presidential election, and we're going to be flooded with video that looks real but isn't?
Brian Johnson, you've been a journalist, of course, but you've also been a documentary filmmaker. Have you had a chance to think a bit about this, about the question of real images and false images, the so-called fake news that is all pervasive, especially from the point of view of someone who's been actually working with real images, trying to craft something out of reality?
Well, it's all relative. I mean, as a journalist, I was herding facts for many, many years, trying to make sense of the world that I was covering. As a filmmaker and a documentary filmmaker, I've kind of resisted the notion of being a content creator, which is the new sort of the way that artists are viewed by the corporations that run the means of distributing their work. It's a very old adage that you shouldn't let facts get in the way of a true story. A lot of fiction writers, novelists will claim that, well, they find more truth in fiction than in, you know, reflection of what's going on. And I think, I mean, what we have right now with the media, we don't so much have a mass media, we have a mass of media. we are in a golden age. Of course, I agree with that in terms of the access and the potential for democratization of as many views of reality or of fantasy that we want to ingest in any particular day. But golden, of course, is a very loaded word these days in the age of Trump. We got to watch that one, whether it's a dome or whether it's the Oval Office. But what we really don't have is any kind of curatorial intelligence that is organized and that is accessible and that is democratic. We have the algorithms, which are organized in such a way as to drive us towards the markets that are dominant and that are most commercial. But that doesn't exactly do the truth any favors. I think what we do need is we don't just need to seize the state, we need to seize the solid state. We need to seize the curatorial kind of engines. And technologically, it's very simple how all of this can be done. There's no reason why we can't direct our own algorithms and decide how to steer them and how to move them. And I think that would go a long way to overturning the kind of just herding of opinion that is going on right now. I didn't really answer your question, Mark, in terms of journalism and film, but I mean, a few things with film. I hate documentaries that reflect reality. When I first picked up an Instamatic camera at a cottage, and I saw there it had a little video function, the first of one of these things, you know, and it was 15 frames per second. And I started shooting with this, and like any of the DIY revolution new artists, I started playing with iMovie. And what was astounding is that these images transformed what I was seeing. The camera has the ability to transform. And it's an old saying that, you know, as soon as you point the camera at something that's going on, you are changing it. It's not a reflection. It's not empirical. And that's one of the things about the moving image. The images don't just move. They move you. They move us. They move the people who watch them. And it's a very powerful, powerful force, like the atom bomb. And again, we need to curate our own experience.
So on to you, Peter. We've had this kind of reflection of what cinema and what television has done, but actually Ed also raised the whole question of AI and what's happening with TikTok and the internet, social media, which is really changing things again. Here you are trying to craft, having, say, volume 1 of what could be the next elements of style. What is the grammar going to be? What are we going to be able to even understand and qualify and quantify in a world where we won't know what is real and what isn't real?
Boy, that's a real question.
Well, thanks.
As usual, follow the money. So in advertising, online advertising, I watch a lot of YouTube. And the commercials that appear on YouTube, sometimes, more often every day, have links at the bottom for being able to click right through to go to the product page or to go to some additional information or another commercial or to learn more. That's an incredible facility that could be used in ways like, you know, the New York Times published an annotated version of the State of the Union address that Trump delivered, which was basically, you know, this isn't true, this isn't true, this isn't true, this isn't true. But there's a way now to do that exact same thing on the video. As far as AI is concerned, good Lord, I'm frightened enough by the real images that I see, but at MIT you can't turn a corner without AI being the topic of discussion now. How to figure out how to regulate AI is a huge challenge for lawmakers everywhere. And it's a bigger challenge at home, I think, because our lawmakers are, let us say, often bought and paid for by interests other than the public interest. So you know, before we get to regulating AI, I think we need to come to a better understanding of what it is we need to do around the moving image, which got us into this fix first and foremost. There are more regulations around the plastic and glass and electronics in a television set because people are concerned about the output in the rivers or in the air. There's more regulation around, in fact, the glue in this book, or the ink, or the paper production, than there is around the ideas inside of it. And that may be fine, but there may be another system of balance that needs to be struck, because what we're doing is having all of these things just float not into our livers or our kidneys or our bloodstreams, you know, but into one of our favorite organs, the one upstairs.
Right. We will have time for one more round of questions, I think, Moses, and then I'm afraid it'll be time for us to hit we'll have been beyond an hour. Is that okay? Okay. Let's get to the heart of the matter. We've talked about politics. We've talked about real news and fake news. But the other thing that's happening here, Peter, in your book, is the issue of archives. It's something that's so essential to all of us, what Anthony does, what Ed does, the kind of material that Brian has wrestled with, and of course what you've dealt with a lot. So a lot has been created, we know this, an incredible amount. Is it all worth preserving? And if so, in what form and where? We're at a place that has a wonderful museum of its own, just for television. And what about cinema? What about books? Is there a room for it all? And in what way, if there is, and if we do believe in the archives, what will the future be for the archives? What can the archives mean to us in the future? And I guess I'm going to start with Anthony, who's had to wrestle with this a lot with Historica.
Yeah, we also do the Canadian Encyclopedia as well, which has about 16 million unique users a year, and it's staff of 6 we update daily. It's 4 different forms of academic citation. In other words, we pay a lot of attention. We've noticed in the last year, among other things, that there's been a very minor but a diminution for the first time in the amount of usage. And I had a meeting the other day and asked the managing editor in charge why that was happening. And the answer is essentially lies with, I guess, among others, with my 24-year-old son, who doesn't use Google anymore because he just asks his AI, he asks ChatGPT, what do I need for that? And we find that some search processes are like that. And there's an issue of accuracy. You're actually down to the question now. Some of you surely have seen, the man who shot Liberty Valance. You remember the great classic line, right? When the legend becomes fact, print the legend. And it approaches the point. The danger is you approach the point where it matters less what is true or factually verified. What may count more is whether it was true or not, is this what people accept as common fact of information? I mean, you have, as you've seen evidenced, a White House that blatantly lies and doesn't care and doesn't even try particularly hard to cover that up. So when you do that, you're messing with the archives as such, because the relevance of it is lost over time. It comes to be questioned. People doubt the veracity of things anyway. They say, well, was that messed with? And finally, we produced a series called Think Like a Historian. We've done some years ago. And the fact is, a lot of stuff considered factually verifiable because it's from the era isn't true. So chances are, if you followed any history, you've seen film of Canadian soldiers in 1918 going up out of the trenches, going over the battlefield to take on, the dreaded Hun, as they said at the time, and do that. There's a very common film that's used all the time that I watched for years because of the nature of my work. And I discovered when we were doing this series that it's not true. It was shot on a practice field where they're training troops somewhere in Ontario at the time. Just as all the letters that were sent home saying the boys are all well, they're all keen to go and fight the Boche and beat the Hun and do all this stuff, all those letters were censored. So they went through somebody. So if you happen to say, I really hate it here, I'm scared to death every day, and my best friend that I grew up with got shot to death yesterday in a really grisly fashion, that letter, it wasn't going home. So you have the ability legitimately to question the veracity of things that you've always been taught are true. And it's very important to know that. But the problem is, in an era where everything is challenged, it makes it all too easy to tear down things like actual factual archives.
Thanks. And I did actually know that story about the World War I. That's an amazing story, isn't it?
Yeah.
Ed, your life has been so much around archives. I think you've thought about this a lot. Can you talk about it?
Certainly. You know, to go to your question about who decides really ultimately what is important, what should be saved, what should be prioritized in digitizing, is something I wrestle with every day. And unfortunately, I would say there is somewhat of an inherent snobbiness when it comes to that. I'm a member of TIFF, the Toronto International Film Festival, who constantly solicit me for donations to restore Alfred Hitchcock's Rear Window. I love Hitchcock, I love Rear Window, but there are countless Canadian tax shelter films, amongst others, that are rotting away. I have Rear Window on 4K DVD, Blu-ray. It doesn't need any more restoration, as far as I can tell. But this is what we're up against. I consider the people that work with my company, Retro Ontario, citizen archivists, which is that we are not working with any corporations, we are not beholden to academic institutions, because they all have an agenda, frankly, whether it's for better or for worse. We are motivated purely by the democracy of what equipment can we salvage, what content, and I hate that word too, it's a dirty word because it equalizes a lot of things that aren't necessarily on the same level. For me, I'm interested in cultural history and certainly cities and localities. And I think the content which best gives you an idea of what was happening in those cities are news broadcasts, archival news broadcasts, children's programming, and advertising. So for me, those are the three subgenres that I will prioritize when it comes to digitizing. Frankly, Hollywood and America, I mean, you have the Library of Congress. In Britain, you have the British Film Institute. Loads of money to do important work, but we don't really have anything approaching that in Canada. It's kind of been left up to the citizens to do, which is a shame. And I think all of the recent questioning about what it means to be Canadian, we have to differentiate what our culture is from American culture. But we've been saturated from birth, my generation anyways, in American popular culture. We have so much popular culture of our own that we should be proud of, that we should be prioritizing, but we're not. So the fight goes on.
Thanks. Brian, some thoughts on archiving?
Well, this is a very different discussion now than it would have been even just a few weeks ago. Because it's very interesting, you know, we think that politicians don't really pay much attention to the arts, you know? It's always on the back burner. Like if you're working for a news magazine, if you're working in the arts, it's the least important thing which allows you to get away with murder, which is why I like working in the arts. But all of a sudden, Trump has produced his most violent political, ideological attack against the intelligentsia, against the arts, against the archive, against the historical record, trying to erase history, Black history Museum, Smithsonian Institute, Kennedy Center. I mean, you know, part of it could be sort of a bit of a personality quirk that he's a showbiz guy and he resents all of these other more successful, more artistically successful people who, you know, number in the thousands. But you sense that there's something just instinctively ideological about his mission that wants to erase truth and erase the record. And that puts a whole different angle on the archive. In other words, it's not just about, you know, let's save a bunch of nice stuff, which, you know, is a luxury. And yes, we should be doing that. You know, film is kind of a memory machine. It's a fleeting by nature. It's very different from television, even though they're now completely, you know, cross-fertilized and content-wise and creatively. There's something about film which is, it's about the past. I mean, if it's seen in its proper context. David Cronenberg once called cinema a cemetery. It's it's about memory. It does things to us that have to do with deep, deep memory, and that's why that kind of moving image really works. And we want to preserve the best of it. It's a lot easier to preserve text, you know? It's smaller, way few terabytes. It's not that hard. Text is, I made a film called The Color of Ink, which was partly about the longevity of ink, which the oldest ink used for communications was on tattoos, probably used for medicinal purposes along acupuncture points on a mummy unearthed from the ice in the Alps thanks to global warming. Ink goes a long way. It sticks around. But these days, it's kind of great. I mean, you know, in terms of your personal archive, I've just spent, coincidentally, the last month or so going through 30 years of material in my unfinished basement and then emptying my storage facility. And sifting through this stuff is incredible. And I realized that you've got to have it personal. And our personal archives are really important, I think. You know, it's, we're constantly archiving our lives in the moment on all these platforms like Facebook and so on, Instagram. But it's evanescent. You know, you can't find it. This will disappear. And I think, Moses, somebody needs to build a big tech platform, kind of like a Wikipedia, which would be deep time. It would be a platform where we can basically author our lives. And you would basically do this as part of your, this would be kind of will. You would do this, but then it would outlive you, and your community, your friends could contribute to contribute. And the thing is, it would be as much privacy as you want in this, and yet, on the other hand, in other words, it'd be user-controlled and totally secure and creative and audio, visual, video. I don't know why nobody's done that. It's a completely untapped market. Just throwing that out there, you know, in case you're getting bored, Moses. But overall, no. I mean, archives, they're alive. You know, the fossil is an archive.
Yep.
The fossil is life written into the earth. The coral reef is a living archive. We are a blip. We try to save our past. Good luck.
Well, thanks, Brian. That was very good, and it was great. You know, give a busy man a lot of extra work. It was wonderful, wonderful idea. And I think for Moses, give a busy man more work to do. I think that's very helpful. Peter, some thoughts here. You've worked a lot on archives over the years, and now you've been working on trying to create a kind of style guide for the future. What are your thoughts on this essential matter?
Well, first of all, or last of all, Mark, this is a heck of a panel you've assembled, so thank you. This is an amazing conversation, and it'd be great if we could go to midnight, so I hope we do. But 3 points. One is to echo what Ed said. When I was going to college, you know, in the apartment or the dorm that I lived in, there was no media to speak of, and you would have to trudge up to the library to access the entire universe of known media at the time. So as an educator and someone who works at an educational institution, this is a challenge that we have to face that's near term, which is how to appeal to the student whose entire life is consumed with audiovisual images, moving images and sound, 24/7, it seems maybe even more than 24 hours a day, you know, music, everything else, video. When they come to the classroom, it's the most sterile environment by contrast. And if you're an educator, you have to think about how to, you know, effectively do what a couple of rare professors of mine did at Cornell, which is like have a needle drop on an FDR fireside chat in an amphitheater. And so you could hear it. We have that ability. We just haven't equipped the professoriate with what to do about it. And that's a problem because these are the people who are going to determine our real future, the students. The second point is, just to echo also, like the citizen archiving. My book in many ways is a love song to the Internet Archive, which does the most amazing things. The board chair, Rick Prellinger, believes in digitizing everything. And it's a love song to Wikipedia, which has some of the same, but not all, of the facilities that we're talking about in this panel, in the sense that it's not controlled by one of the guys who showed up at that inauguration. It's super important to digitize everything, whether or not you keep the actual, because if it's not digital, if someone's searching on TikTok, or if someone's searching an AI engine, it's going to be super hard to have it surface. So all of the truths that are paywalled now need to quickly get unpaywalled and get digitized. And the last thing I want to say is there's a real opportunity to think through some of the things I'm trying to stimulate, I guess, in this book around sourcing and verification. Noel Coward, the great Noel Coward, once observed that coming across a footnote is like going downstairs to answer the doorbell while making love. and I think that that may be our initial reaction to some of that source material. But if we know that, we have to ask that follow-up question when we consume media, which is how real is it? And what proof do you have? If we care about it, if we're part of the group that cares about this stuff, we've got to figure out ways to do that in and through the moving image, even as we look to the future of AI.
Well, this group, I think, does care a lot about the moving image. And your book, Peter, The Moving Image User's Manual, is available. We actually brought in copies from MIT, and they're available in the next room over. They're for sale. So if anyone would like to purchase a copy, I suspect that, Peter, you'd be willing to sign a copy if somebody bought a book.
Yeah, and no two copies are exactly alike. So if you need to buy two copies, just to verify that the two are the same. Yeah.
That's a good sales pitch.
I've been working on it, do these events.
And I have a kind of final word that I'm going to show another clip from Moses's TV. A final word from the philosopher of media in Canada, Marshall McLuhan. So we'll leave McLuhan to ask a few questions as we exit this panel. Thank you very much to Anthony Wilson-Smith, to Ed Conroy, to Brian D. Johnson, and to Peter B. Kaufman.
Canadians can legitimately claim to have thought about it most deeply and communicated that thought most widely. And we can make that claim because of one man, Marshall McLuhan, who taught here. We are now undoubtedly in a better position to judge his worth than when he was alive.
Television is a serious medium. It's an inner-oriented medium. You are the vanishing point. It goes inside you. You go on an inner trip. It is the prelude, the vestibule to LSD. TV is an inward and depth medium in which all sorts of meditation goes on in everybody's bosom. If you're surrounded with banality of programming, then why not devote your powers to discerning patterns and exciting matters in the banalities, instead of merely selecting and sorting and discarding and ignoring nearly everything around you. In our age, the biggest activity anybody can engage in is observation, because we live in an age of information overload when the amount to be observed and ordered is fantastic. Jacques Ellul, in his book on propaganda, points out that the 20th century child is the hardest working child in human history. And his work consists in simply data processing from morning till night on a huge scale. Any child exposed to radio and TV from the age of 2 or 3 onward has a sense of total participation in the adult world. He's absolutely baffled when he's told that he is a youngster who has no relation to that world yet. He must wait, because his experience tells him he's already in it, thoroughly. I mean, the immediate participation in adult entertainment, adult values, and he goes to nightclubs. He goes to work with grown-ups in the sorts of shows that are shown. Any technology creates a new environment, a new set of relationships among people. Print created the public. Before printing, no kind of handwriting was capable of creating a public. It wasn't strong enough or powerful enough technologically to create what is called a public. With electric technology, the public disappears into what is now called, somewhat unhappily, the mass audience. Now, the mass is a group of people who are totally involved in each other. They don't have the simple classified status of people sitting in rows in seats or in rows of desks in classrooms, as far as that goes. The mass audience is one of instant circuitry and involvement, and its boundaries are not national at all. Before there are publics, you have the tribal mass. Everybody, a relative of everybody, everybody involved in depth in everybody. And with writing and then printing came the separating out of the individual from that amorphous mass. The whole power of this type of technology permitted classification of cards of identity, passports, individualism, and so after centuries of customation to such classified individual entities and private patterns of organizing oneself and knowledge, it is terribly confusing to be thrust back into the amorphous tribal mass of complete human interdependence and interinvolvement. But this simply happens, and I think that we should notice that we are doing it to ourselves. Nobody is doing it to us, and therefore to lament about what we choose to do to ourselves is a slightly useless gesture. I don't lament, I don't make any value judgments about these changes. I just feel that it's very urgent to understand what's happening so that we may take action if we chose to take action.
So actually, Moses has intervened. There's always room for a little bit more democracy, and so we're now going to entertain questions from the audience. If people have any, please raise your hand, and Daria will go around with a microphone so we can hear. Okay, there we go.
Hi, it's Melanie. Hi, Brian. You'd give me an article. Thanks. I'm listening to you guys. I'm a musician and a singer, but politically, is this not reminiscent of Stalin and Lavrentiy Beria in the Soviet Union? The way they used to cover up and erase people from who they didn't want? Isn't this what Trump is doing?
If I can intervene, actually, oddly enough, this is something that Moses and I just discussed. There's a book, Brian, you might remember, called The Commissar is No Longer in the Picture. And what it was essentially Trotskyists, but anybody who ended up being a dissident. And you'd get a series of pictures, and in one picture there'd be 7 people, and then there'd be down to 5, and then there'd be down to 3, as they kind of early photoshopping, if you will, simply cut people out. So I guess that's the question.
Yeah, I think Stalinism kind of perfected that, the art of erasure.
But I mean, how does it affect us now? Is that the beginning?
Before our eyes, isn't it? I mean, that's what Trump is doing. But I think there's also something. I mean, I don't know, Peter, what you think, but there's some just a sort of reflexive kind of activity of suppressing stuff. Well, for instance, the CBC just, at a certain point, I remember historically, just threw out so many archives. Yeah. There's a willful amnesia in the culture that is so wedded to maximizing productivity, profit, et cetera, consumerism, that it disgorges its past, as basically just shit.
Peter.
So I was trained as a Sovietologist. I speak Russian, and I studied a lot of that period. So you betcha. What's interesting, and in the previous book I wrote, there's a whole section on the architecture of totalitarian thought control. When, as Brian's saying, like we have a president down south, or whatever we say up here, that nukes the Librarian of Congress and strips funding from the National Museum of African American History and Culture, and a whole lot of other things besides, at the same time as he's amassing this oligarchy, not of people like Putin has done, who control the nickel mines and the forests and the oil and the gas and the railroads, but the screens and the speakers. This is an uncanny genius horror show, and not хорошо like we say in Russian, but a horror show. And we have to appreciate it for what it is, because there are people, the Tuskegee Airmen, for example, who are being written out of the American historical record. Trump is not alone. There's Putin, there's Xi, there's Modi, there's Netanyahu, there's a whole lot of other world leaders who followed Berlusconi's footsteps. And boy, oh boy, what a mess we're in. So keep fighting, singing, fighting.
Oh, there.
Ничего.
Hi, Judith Doyle, filmmaker and professor at OCAD University. Give me a second to frame this, but we do have some interesting archives coming out of universities in Toronto. I'm thinking, for example, of the Feminist Recycling Project at York University, or at TMU, the Film and Video Conservation Master's Program. All of them are feisty, opinionated, and they generate community, which brings me to a question related to AI. Mark and I were talking one time at lunch about the concept of the cure for loneliness. And it brought to mind that the new ChatGPT 4.0 has been singled out for its sycophantic character, which is to say it's super friendly and flattering, wasting all kinds of tons of energy on being super flattering to its user. And one of its greatest skill sets is being a magic mirror. It could generate your biography instantly with many footnotes, and even may remember you, thinking from our age category, better than you remember yourself. So the question for me is about the affect and emotion of the archive. How can we create archive networks that generate communities and feelings of participation and belonging? Maybe footnotes aren't always that boring. I'm a bit scholarly, but anyway, that you can actually, if you're with a book that takes you in those directions that you need to go and helps you meet the people you need to meet. I mean, I'm sensing that in what you're saying. So I wonder if you could, Peter, maybe speak to that dimension of affect and emotion in the archive.
Yes.
So I frequently enrage all kinds of people because I show up at museum conferences, and then at library conferences, and then at public broadcasting conferences, and then at education conferences and stuff. I also spend probably too much time going to conferences, come to think of it. But these are siloed in ways that shouldn't continue, because it really is the case that the museum community is not talking enough to the library community, even though there's some, I think in Canada even there's a museum and library, there was in the States. Trump has stripped it of its funding, the Institute for Museum and Library Services. But there needs to be a collective effort to appreciate the power of archives. In one of the top grossing films of all time, there was this, David Cameron made it, there's this connectivity that's supposed to take place, that's healing between the Na'vi people or whatever, that are blue with the pointy ears. And so when you plug into the archive, you suddenly heal. And so there is something super important about connecting to the archive. And also, when we talk about AI, there's generative AI, which can generate a kind of fake thing using computer power as though 1 million human beings were working on it for months. But between that and where we are now, there are also all these people who are just creating fake media. We have at MIT something called the Center for Advanced Virtuality. It's part of open learning. I have no idea, really. But the guy who runs it created a deep fake based on a speech that is extraordinary. And there are 34 QR codes in my book, and one of the QR codes leads to that 7-minute creation, which is if the astronauts had not come back from the moon in 1969, Nixon had prepared a speech for that. William Safire had written the speech for him. And my colleague at Open Learning created the video of Nixon delivering that speech using the archival text, and it looks pretty good. It looks as though it were part of the record. And that's not using AI at all.
Great question, great answer, Odaria. And Moses, what do you think? Last question, yeah? Okay. Yes, let's hear this question.
Hello, and thank you. My name is Marco Martin. I'm not in the media. I'm actually in finance, but as a citizen observer, I would like to know your take on the influencer, the rise of the influencer. I mean, influencer is, as the name says, a manipulator, and people now idolize these people, these amateur experts that some have production quality to rival studios that give them it makes them more real, more believable, I guess. I just want to see what is your take on the rise of the influencer?
Peter, do you want to answer that, or Ed, actually?
I mean, if I may.
You may.
I have a 10-year-old daughter and an 8-year-old son, and it never ceases to amaze me how much they consume on YouTube. And it is mostly videos of other people playing Minecraft. Even though they have Minecraft, they could play it themselves. And when I watch them, I try to understand this new way of thinking that is very prevalent amongst the new generation, which is that they're not differentiating between, as you say, an influencer with a Mr. Beast and something coming out of Hollywood, right? And that's why Hollywood, I mean, there's a number of reasons they're struggling, but that's one of them, right? There's nothing that is getting the young people excited like in the good old days. The influencer, though, is very fleeting. I'm sure you know that out of the millions and billions, to quote Carl Sagan, of influencers out there, how many of them actually do make a sustainable career out of it? And I guess what scares me is that you do have a flight of young people that see that as a viable career, having a TikTok channel or a YouTube channel. And it's nonsense, right? It's not sustainable.
Anthony.
Yeah, I want to sort of tie the last three questions together. Я могу говорить по-русски тоже. Я жил в Москве 3 года. I worked in Moscow for 3 years at the end of the Gorbachev era. And where it comes to pass is that was the time, as you remember, of glasnost, of the opening of perestroika, of reform, of everything. So people heard the stories and were forever telling stories of the abuses of Stalinism in the 30s. And it was all out there. And for the first time, you had access to the archives. And after whatever period you'll remember, and after Yeltsin came in and then Putin arrived, it wasn't convenient anymore. The bad information didn't fit the new National Archive. People didn't want it there. So that whole period really of glasnost is gone, and the effect of that is gone as well, because the thing about history is that what you leave out is as important as what you put in. And it's become convenient to leave that out. So in terms of the archives, it matters only to the extent that people still continue to care. And of course, and the easy time to get rid of it is times like now when people actually are not demonstrating they care, so the importance becomes greater. And if I go back to another old Russian saying we know better from American history, you'll remember that when Reagan met Gorbachev, or perhaps you'll remember, he said at the end of his speech, you know, on the reaching a landmark arms treaty, trust but verify. I would put it to you that these days, just verify. What's the trust?
If I can add just one thing myself, Mark.
Sure.
The notion, one of the notions about media that I wanted to raise, and it sort of relates to influencers, is how atomized everything is. And influencers are atomized. You know, they're these individual voices looking through a little narrow tube and trying to expand the radius of their influence. Everybody listens to music now on earbuds. They walk the streets with earbuds. And the public space, the public square, the auditorium, what we're in right now, is a bit of an endangered species. And I think there's nothing more challenging to power and lies than that public square. And it's no accident that Trump decided to try to pick off Taylor Swift and Springsteen. They're influencers, big time, you know, and they do it with flesh and blood, in the same room with people, in a vast crowd, where they're very, very vulnerable, but very powerful at the same time. So, you know, I think the restitution of the public square as a mediascape, as a physical space, is kind of what we need.
Thanks, Brian. And Peter, maybe the last words from you.
Sure, amazing comments, I mean, and questions, and just the great dialogue. Like, you know, influencers, all kinds of people are influencers. A lot of the, Martin Luther was an influencer, but like a lot of the people who are influencers today are in it because of fame and because of money. Wow, wouldn't it be great to seed some influencers out there who are influencers in the public, toward the public good, like actually doing some things, using the platforms that we currently have, and maybe the one that Moses apparently is building now. But like, wouldn't it be great to have that happen? What we really need to study, maybe going out of here and get involved in, is the architecture of resilience, to understand how we fight back against people who are doing the kinds of things that you're saying, and you're saying, and you're saying, and you're saying, and I'm saying, and he said, he's been saying for 30 plus. Like, it's a real challenge. And if we can come together in more forums like this one, I think we stand a good chance of sorting it out.
Well, thank you, Peter, and thanks to the panel again. Oh, sorry, Ed?
One final observation. The clips that we watched from TV, as Moses mentioned, aired, I believe it was 30 years ago this month.
Yes.
And Moses, if I recall correctly, I mean, you were lambasted in some quarters for that program. Terrible reviews. And I think time has vindicated that program. And I invite everyone tonight to go watch the full show on YouTube, because thank God it's there.
Amen to that.
Well, there you go. Thank you. Well, this concludes, and I think we all agree we should be preserving the past for the future. Thanks very much to everyone.